For years and years, Brits have said that we have it worse than America with the heat. The World Cup is about to settle that argument once and for all, and I am so here for it. I'm so excited to see their reaction. England fans are about to find out that our heat waves are nothing compared to America. England's first World Cup game is in Texas, and every year when we have a heat wave, when it turns 30 degrees Celsius, which is 86 Fahrenheit, we complain and we say that we have it worse than Americans because we don't have AC, the humidity is unbearable, and the way our houses are built. But now, all of these English fans are about to spend weeks in Texas in the summer, so they are actually going to experience Texas heat. Americans, do you think they are going to be able to cope with the heat and the humidity you guys have in Texas and the southern states? Because I think they are in for the shock of their life.
What if the country Europeans were taught to pity turned out to feel richer than home? During the 2026 World Cup, that question stopped being theoretical. Bigger homes, higher pay, endless convenience, and everyday abundance forced an awkward comparison with Britain. So how much of America's decline was reality, and how much was simply the version that traveled best across the Atlantic? Once visitors saw the difference for themselves, going home suddenly felt a lot less exciting. America goes XL. The first surprise waiting for many Europeans during the 2026 World Cup was not inside a stadium at all. It was parked quietly behind a front door, surrounded by a lawn, a driveway, a garage, and enough indoor space to make an ordinary British house suddenly feel as though somebody had pinched it smaller with 2 fingers. This is where one of the most uncomfortable comparisons with Britain begins, because television and European news coverage often train people to picture America through its worst headlines. Expensive healthcare, homelessness, political arguments, unaffordable cities. Those stories travel extremely well across the Atlantic. What travels less often is the sight of an ordinary middle-class neighborhood where the house has a separate laundry room, 2 bathrooms, a basement, a garage, a backyard, and a kitchen island large enough to host Thanksgiving negotiations. That difference becomes much clearer when Britain enters the comparison. In London, where land is precious and housing is notoriously expensive, a modest terraced house can involve narrow rooms, compact kitchens, and staircases that feel like they were designed when humans were considerably thinner. Even outside London, British housing tends to be smaller than American housing, because towns such as Birmingham, Manchester, and Bristol developed within a much older urban pattern, where streets, plots, and neighborhoods were established long before 2-car garages became a normal suburban idea. Then visitors arrive in places such as Dallas, Kansas City, Atlanta, or the outer suburbs of Houston, and the American definition of ordinary starts playing tricks on them. A 3-bedroom house may come with multiple bathrooms, a full-size kitchen, a driveway long enough for several cars, and a garage that some London renters might reasonably mistake for a studio apartment. Americans walk through these spaces without thinking twice, because when something has always been normal, nobody stands in the hallway admiring its square footage like they are visiting Versailles. That is exactly why the reaction is so revealing. America's abundance is often hidden inside things Americans barely notice. The spare bedroom used for storage, the basement nobody has fully organized, the walk-in closet containing clothes last worn during a previous administration. Even the famous American garage has evolved into a mysterious national ecosystem, where cars somehow coexist with bicycles, power tools, Christmas decorations, coolers, and one folding chair nobody remembers buying. For many World Cup visitors, that physical space challenged an image of America built almost entirely from headlines. Britain remains wealthy, sophisticated, and deeply attractive in its own way, with historic neighborhoods and walkable cities Americans often admire. But when the comparison shifts from national reputation to the amount of private space an ordinary family can actually use, America suddenly looks remarkably prosperous. And that may be the part European media rarely manages to photograph properly. You can publish 1,000 gloomy stories about the United States, but once somebody has spent a few weeks walking through American homes, shopping with American families, and discovering that the extra room really is just an extra room, The argument becomes harder to sell. After enough time in America, going home can feel less like leaving a vacation and more like trying to fit your life back into a carry-on suitcase. The paycheck gap. If housing space made some European visitors reconsider what ordinary means in America, income can be an even more uncomfortable comparison because this one follows people home every month. The strange part is that many Europeans arrive expecting American life to feel financially fragile. That expectation is understandable when so much overseas coverage focuses on medical bills, student debt, rent in Manhattan, or workers struggling to make ends meet. Those problems are real, but they can hide another reality that becomes obvious once you spend time around ordinary Americans. Across many professional and skilled jobs, the paycheck itself can be dramatically higher than what workers in Britain are used to seeing. According to OECD data, the United States consistently ranks near the top of developed economies for average household disposable income per person, while the United Kingdom sits noticeably lower. The gap becomes especially visible in careers such as technology, engineering, medicine, finance, and skilled trades where American salaries can look almost fictional to someone reading them from London, Manchester, or Birmingham. Take software work as an easy example. A developer in London may earn a respectable salary by British standards, yet the same type of role in Seattle, Austin, or the Bay Area can pay tens of thousands of dollars more before bonuses and stock compensation even enter the conversation. The cost of living matters enormously, especially in San Francisco or New York, but America also contains plenty of lower-cost metropolitan areas where salaries still remain comparatively strong. That is where the comparison starts becoming interesting rather than simply numerical. Britain has a culture in which a $40,000 or $50,000 annual salary can still sound solid and respectable in many parts of the country. In large parts of the United States, hearing an experienced professional mention an income above $100,000 is far less unusual than many European visitors expect. The American six-figure salary has almost become its own cultural landmark, somewhere between the backyard barbecue and the Costco membership, and that changes behavior. Higher earnings do not automatically mean everyone feels rich, because Americans also pay more directly for things that British residents partly finance through taxation, especially healthcare and higher education. Yet the larger paycheck gives many households more room for consumption, travel, bigger vehicles, larger homes, retirement investing, dining out, hobbies, and all the little conveniences that visitors notice before they ever see a tax return. This is why the comparison can feel especially awkward for Britain. The United Kingdom is not some struggling country on the edge of Europe. London remains one of the world's great financial centers. Britain has elite universities, globally important companies, and enormous accumulated wealth. Yet wage growth has been a persistent concern for years, and British productivity has struggled compared with the United States. The result is a peculiar contrast. A country that looks elegant and wealthy from the outside can still leave many workers feeling that their salaries stopped growing somewhere around the time everyone discovered avocado toast. America, meanwhile, can look chaotic in the headlines while quietly sending millions of workers home with larger monthly incomes. That does not make every American wealthy, and it does not erase inequality, but it helps explain why some European visitors begin seeing the country differently once they stay long enough to compare normal jobs rather than national stereotypes. America's appeal is not simply that people spend more. In many cases, they are paid more first. And once that realization settles in, the famous American shopping cart suddenly makes a lot more sense. America runs cool. There's one American luxury so ordinary that Americans barely consider it a luxury at all: stepping indoors in July and immediately feeling the temperature drop 20 degrees. For European visitors arriving during the summer of 2026, that small blast of cold air can become strangely addictive. You walk through a parking lot under a brutal afternoon sun, open the door of a restaurant, and suddenly the building greets you like somebody opened a refrigerator the size of Texas. Within 30 seconds, the heat outside already feels like somebody else's problem. That experience says something surprisingly important about American living standards. According to the International Energy Agency, around 90% of American households had air conditioning by the late 2010s, while fewer than 1 in 10 European households did at the time. Adoption has increased across Europe since then, especially after repeated heat waves, but the cultural gap remains enormous. In much of the United States, cooling a home is treated less like an optional upgrade and more like plumbing. People simply expect the building to handle summer. Britain developed very differently. London, Manchester, and Birmingham historically had mild enough summers that residential air conditioning rarely made economic sense. Older brick housing was designed for another climate, and many homes still depend on opening windows, drawing curtains, and placing a heroic little electric fan beside the bed when temperatures climb. An American visiting Britain might call that traditional. A European arriving in Dallas during August may discover why Americans took a different path approximately 7 minutes after leaving the airport. What makes American cooling culture fascinating is how completely it extends beyond the house. Grocery stores are cool, restaurants are cool. Movie theaters occasionally seem prepared to preserve frozen peas. Office buildings can be cold enough that employees keep sweaters at their desks, while the sidewalk outside is attempting to cook an egg. There is something wonderfully American about solving summer by refusing to negotiate with it. The country built enormous portions of modern life around climate control because large areas genuinely require it. Phoenix regularly sees summer highs above 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Houston combines heat with heavy humidity, and cities across the South can remain uncomfortable well into the evening. Air conditioning did more than make those places pleasant. Historians and economists have linked its spread to the rapid population growth of the Sun Belt during the 20th century. That helps explain why European visitors can become attached to it so quickly. The pleasure is not really the machine itself, it is the expectation that comfort should follow you around. At home, at dinner, while shopping, inside a hotel, even while waiting for a flight, Americans have designed countless indoor spaces around the idea that weather should stay outside where it belongs. Britain has wonderful summers when the weather cooperates, and its older homes carry a character Americans often find charming. Yet after several weeks in America, returning to a warm bedroom and negotiating with a desk fan can suddenly feel like giving up a convenience you never knew you needed. America has many grand symbols of prosperity, but perhaps one of the most persuasive is invisible. It is simply the moment a door opens, cold air rolls across your face, and summer loses the argument. The portion plot. Some countries reveal prosperity through luxury boutiques. America occasionally does it by bringing dinner to the table on a plate wide enough to qualify as patio furniture. For Europeans spending time in the United States during the 2026 World Cup, restaurant portions can create one of those wonderfully confusing moments when a cultural stereotype suddenly turns into something much more interesting. The joke is usually that Americans simply eat too much, but that explanation misses half the story. What visitors are really encountering is a service culture built around abundance, value, leftovers, and the very American belief that a customer should leave feeling they received more than they expected. That attitude has deep roots. A well-known cross-cultural study published in Psychological Science compared food portions in Philadelphia and Paris and found larger portions across a range of American restaurants and food products. The researchers were studying eating behavior, yet the cultural difference behind those measurements is just as revealing. Americans became accustomed to restaurants competing partly through generosity. A British pub approaches dinner differently. Order fish and chips in London, Manchester, or Leeds, and you can receive a perfectly satisfying meal without the plate appearing to have a next neighboring territory. British restaurant culture generally expects one meal to be eaten as one meal. America quietly introduced another character into the story: tomorrow's lunch. That cardboard takeout box sitting beside the check changes the meaning of a large portion. Half a rack of ribs can become another meal. A mountain of pasta gets a second life in the office microwave. Americans do not necessarily sit there heroically consuming every French fry, like the nation depends on it. Taking leftovers home is so routine that servers often offer a box without anyone treating the request as embarrassing. Then there are the drinks. In much of Britain and continental Europe, ordering another Coke usually means ordering another Coke. Across countless American casual restaurants, the glass can refill almost automatically, sometimes before the customer has even realized it is getting low. For a visitor accustomed to paying separately for each bottle, that tiny ritual can feel suspiciously generous. And this is where American dining becomes addictive in a way price comparisons alone cannot explain. You stop calculating every extra sip. You stop wondering whether asking for sauce will add something to the bill. You begin expecting ice water immediately, condiments without ceremony, leftovers packed without judgment, and enough food that nobody at the table has to perform advanced mathematics before ordering. That is abundance expressed as hospitality. Nobody needs to pretend every oversized entree is nutritionally perfect, because even Americans joke about portions that arrive looking prepared for a family reunion. Yet underneath the humor sits something Europeans sometimes underestimate about the United States. American businesses compete aggressively for the ordinary customer's affection. The restaurant wants you to feel taken care of. That can be startling after Britain, where service is often more restrained and where generosity is less likely to announce itself through a bowl of fries resembling a geological formation. After several weeks in America, the danger is not simply getting used to larger meals, it is getting used to the feeling that the restaurant seems genuinely disappointed if you leave without enough food for tomorrow. America never closes. At 10:47 at night, Britain is already beginning to negotiate with tomorrow. In much of America, somebody is still ordering pancakes, picking up medicine, buying a phone charger, filling the gas tank, and standing under fluorescent lights, wondering whether they really need a 12-pack of Gatorade. That difference sounds trivial until you live inside it for a while. For many Europeans visiting during the 2026 World Cup, One of America's most seductive luxuries is not something expensive at all. It is the simple feeling that the country has not decided your day is over just because the clock says so. Britain has a much more defined rhythm around business hours. In England and Wales, the Sunday Trading Act limits large shops over 280 square meters to 6 continuous hours of trading on Sundays, generally within the period between 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. That rule is so familiar locally that nobody thinks twice about planning around it. Cross the Atlantic, and the relationship with time changes completely. Many American supermarkets operate late into the evening. Convenience stores commonly run around the clock. Pharmacies in major metropolitan areas may keep extended hours. And diners have built entire identities around feeding people when sensible society has already brushed its teeth. Even where true 24-hour service has become less common than it once was, especially since the pandemic, America still retains a culture in which late-night convenience is treated as a normal commercial expectation. That expectation is the addictive part. Suppose a match ends late, traffic drags on, and everyone finally reaches the hotel close to midnight. In many European cities, the evening has entered its final chapter, and the available choices shrink quickly. In an American metro area, the night often still has options. A grocery store may still be open. A drive-thru may still be serving. A gas station can sell snacks, drinks, coffee, medicine, and enough miscellaneous supplies to rescue a surprisingly large number of bad decisions. American convenience stores deserve their own anthropology department. They began as places to buy fuel and somehow evolved into tiny survival stations where you can purchase breakfast, sunglasses, beef jerky, painkillers, a lottery ticket, windshield fluid, and a suspiciously ambitious fountain drink in a cup large enough to require structural engineering. The humor hides a serious cultural point. America is unusually willing to organize businesses around the customer's schedule instead of expecting the customer to organize life around the business. Long opening hours require labor, electricity, and operating costs, so they are not automatically efficient or desirable everywhere. Britain's shorter hours can protect workers' time and reflect a healthier boundary between commerce and daily life. Yet once visitors become accustomed to the American version, convenience quietly rewires expectations. You stop checking whether the supermarket closes before dinner. You stop buying tomorrow's medicine today just in case. You become comfortable knowing that if a flight lands late, a child gets hungry, or somebody suddenly remembers there is no toothpaste in the hotel room, the city probably has an answer. That reliability feels richer than it sounds. Wealth is easy to picture as money, property, or expensive cars, but prosperity can also mean having enough infrastructure, competition, and consumer demand for society to remain useful at inconvenient hours. And that may be one of America's least glamorous superpowers. The country has somehow managed to make "I forgot something" feel less like a problem and more like a 5-minute drive. Choice overload. A European can understand American abundance perfectly well until an American asks one innocent question: what kind do you want? That is when the trouble starts. Not, do you want cereal? But which cereal? Not which toothpaste, but whitening, sensitive enamel repair, charcoal, fresh mint, clean mint, icy mint, and apparently several other forms of mint that science has only recently discovered. During the 2026 World Cup, visitors expecting America to resemble the grim version they had absorbed from overseas headlines could walk into an ordinary suburban store and encounter a completely different argument about prosperity. Shelves that behave as if scarcity personally offended them. This is less about buying more than it is about being allowed to choose more. The United States has developed one of the largest retail environments in the developed world. Commercial real estate research has repeatedly estimated American shopping center space at well over 20 square feet per person, several times the level found in many European markets. Exact definitions vary by study, but the broader pattern is unmistakable. Americans have built an extraordinary amount of physical space dedicated to putting competing products in front of ordinary customers. Britain works on a tighter canvas. A Tesco in Manchester or Sainsbury's in London can offer plenty of variety, yet British retail has been shaped by denser cities, smaller store footprints, higher land costs, and households that often shop more frequently. American suburban retail developed around customers arriving by car, buying for larger households, and taking everything back to kitchens with enough storage to handle the evidence. That environment changed the American shopper. If one brand disappoints you, another is sitting 12 inches away, looking suspiciously confident. If a coffee creamer fails to understand your emotional needs, there may be 15 replacements auditioning beside it. Entire supermarket aisles can feel less like shopping, and more like the first round of America's Got Yogurt. The joke matters because competition at that scale gives customers something easy to underestimate: power. American retailers know shoppers can leave, brands know they can be replaced, restaurants know another restaurant is across the highway. That pressure encourages bigger selections, constant promotions, private label products, loyalty programs, and an almost obsessive effort to turn personal preference into another shelf category. Sometimes it becomes ridiculous, and Americans themselves know it. Nobody urgently needed 17 versions of barbecue sauce, but somewhere in Missouri, apparently, democracy demanded a recount. Still, after a few weeks, the excess begins to feel strangely comfortable. You stop asking whether a store carries the thing you want, and start assuming it probably carries 3 versions of it. Vegetarian, gluten-free, family size, sugar-free, organic, budget, premium, spicy, extra spicy, and one version marketed to people who apparently want breakfast to have a personality. That expectation can make the return to Britain feel surprisingly restrained. Britain has excellent supermarkets, famous department stores, and a sophisticated consumer economy. So this is hardly comparison between abundance and deprivation. The difference is one of scale. America gives consumer choice an almost theatrical amount of room, and that matters to the larger image of the country. A visitor can hear repeatedly that ordinary Americans are struggling, then walk into a store where middle-class consumers are choosing between 40 variations of the same basic product at multiple price points. Those realities can coexist, but the second one rarely gets the dramatic international headline. Perhaps because local family has 11 kinds of peanut butter available does not sound like breaking news. Spend enough time in America, though, and that ordinary choice becomes part of the attraction. The country keeps asking what you prefer, then somehow finds room on the shelf for the answer. Laundry on easy mode. One of the funniest ways to measure living standards has absolutely nothing to do with salaries, skyscrapers, or luxury cars. It is what happens to a wet bath towel at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night. In a typical American household, the towel often disappears into a dryer and returns warm, fluffy, and ready for duty before anyone has finished arguing about what to watch on Netflix. Nobody celebrates this. Nobody invites the neighbors over. The machine just sits there quietly turning one of humanity's oldest chores into background noise. That boring little convenience becomes far more interesting when compared with Britain. According to the US, Energy Information Administration's Residential Energy Consumption Survey, clothes dryers are found in roughly 4 out of 5 American homes. In Britain, tumble dryers are common too, but they are nowhere near as universal, especially in smaller homes where space, electricity costs, and long-established air drying habits make washing lines and drying racks perfectly normal. Anyone who has spent time in London knows the choreography. A folding rack appears beside a radiator. Shirts occupy every available bar. Socks are strategically placed like tiny flags marking newly conquered territory. By evening, one corner of the flat can resemble a low-budget department store after closing time. There's nothing wrong with that system, and millions of British households live comfortably with it. Yet American laundry culture reveals something different about how the country defines convenience. If a repetitive household task can be mechanized, Americans have an almost emotional commitment to making the machine do it. The dryer is particularly revealing because it saves more than effort. It saves planning. Rain tomorrow does not matter. Humidity does not matter. Nobody needs to remember whether the sheets have been hanging for 6 hours or 16. A family can wash several loads in one afternoon and keep moving, which is especially useful in a country where larger households, sports uniforms, work clothes, towels, and bedding can turn laundry into a small logistics company. Then there is the experience itself. Warm towels straight from the dryer are dangerously persuasive. Put one around your shoulders on a cold morning and suddenly air drying begins to feel less like an environmental choice and more like something your ancestors did because electricity had not been invented yet. Americans naturally have taken the idea further. Many suburban homes place the washer and dryer together in a dedicated laundry room, sometimes with cabinets, counters, a sink, and enough detergent to handle the laundry requirements of a minor league baseball team. This is where the cultural comparison becomes much more interesting than simply asking which country owns more machines. Britain often treats domestic space as something to manage carefully because centuries-old housing and higher density demand efficiency. America frequently treats time as the thing worth saving. Bigger appliances, larger capacity machines, dryers, garbage disposals, dishwashers, and robotic vacuums all grow from the same instinct. Household chores should occupy as little of your day as technology can reasonably arrange. That mentality can become surprisingly hard to give up. After spending several weeks in an American home, nobody writes a love letter to the dryer. They simply become accustomed to throwing in wet clothes and getting them back 40 minutes later without checking the weather forecast. Then they return to Britain, see a drying rack unfolding across the living room, and suddenly understand something that statistics about national wealth rarely capture. Sometimes prosperity is not owning something impressive enough to show your friends. Sometimes it is getting your living room back from the socks. Maybe that is the real surprise America leaves behind. Not that everything is perfect, but that everyday life can feel richer, easier, and more generous than the headlines ever suggested. Sometimes a country is best understood through the small comforts people stop noticing because they have always been there. If you have ever watched a visitor fall in love with something Americans consider completely normal, share that moment below and subscribe to the channel for more stories that reveal America beyond the headlines.